Easter, because of course without Easter, Christmas has absolutely no meaning at all. So we have all this excitement of the birth of Christ. We have starlight, this wonderful bright star, and I did actually manage to see the Christmas star. I don't know how many of you did. If you missed it, you've got to wait 600 years. It's a conjunction of two planets. But I was only there because the dog wanted to be out in the middle of the night. He has his reasons. So we have the star. We have a host of angels singing. We have shepherds, bemused perhaps, but excited. And later we have the Magi coming. It's all absolutely wonderful, isn't it? And then nothing happens, apparently, for 30 years. Which isn't strictly true, because first of all, Mary and Joseph, like good Jews, took the baby to be presented in the temple. And we read that, moved by the Spirit, Simeon went into the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel." A wonderful prophecy, and you wonder what Mary and Joseph thought of that. But it was reinforcing the promises that had already been made to Mary. And yet, nothing seems to happen for a very long time. Was God on a sort of lockdown? But all the time, Jesus and the family were sharing the human experiences, showing that God is with us in all sorts of situations. He was a refugee with his parents in Egypt, presumably having to learn a new language, or maybe as a baby learning two languages at the same time, learning new customs, new food, and certainly alien gods around, a very strange world for a strict Jew to be in. And then, of course, when he was 12, as John reminded us on Easter Day, Christmas Day. I'm sorry, if I'm getting the wrong words, it means I'm heading for migraine. They lost Jesus. I mean, what do you do when God has entrusted you with his son to bring up and you've lost him? I mean, we've all lost something precious and been delighted to find it. But you can only imagine what Mary and Joseph felt. But of course, all this time, Jesus was learning. He was learning the scripture, the Psalms, Isaiah, presumably taught by Mary, who we think, according to the tradition of the early church, came from quite a well-off family. And her brother was a trader, a merchant trader. And it is, according to the early church, thought that he brought Jesus with him when he came to Britannia. Hence Blake's poem of Jerusalem, and did those feet in ancient time, kind of falls down when it talks about dark satanic mills, because they weren't there then. But he's gaining the experience of life, meeting different people, different nations. And he's making friends. He's listening and he's questioning. He's using his brain to tackle the rabbis with those difficult questions. And then, of course, facing bereavement when Joseph dies and taking on the leadership of the family and bringing up his brothers and sisters who didn't seem to think much of him when he started his ministry and thought he'd gone mad. But it wasn't just in Jesus' life. that God was working. There were 12 men, as my husband would like to remind you, 11 northerners and one southerner, who was Judas. And they were working, they were learning ordinary skills, attending the synagogue like good Jews. And a couple at least were attending some very dodgy meetings because they wanted to break away from Rome. Perhaps this was Romex that they were going through. And the preacher in Ecclesiastes says that there is nothing new under the sun. But in this case there is, because Christmas and Easter are very much new experiences for mankind. But these men who were learning their trades and presumably getting married and having children and doing all the things that ordinary people do were being prepared to be ready to follow where Jesus led them, even if, as for most of them, it meant a martyr's death. And there were two other men at some stage in these 30 years, a young Greek who became a doctor in Troy, and a Pharisee sailmaker in Tarsus, who were also seeking God and praying and being educated and presumably, certainly in Paul's case, arguing. In Luke's case, he was making notes and recording what he saw and felt. And they were ready to spearhead the church into the next generation. So it wasn't not nothing happening, but God preparing, God being revealed to us in the waiting, just as bulbs are in the ground at the moment, waiting for spring, for the greatest moment in history and for the resurrection. God was not on lockdown. He was planning, and I'm sure that in our present lockdown, he's still planning and working, and the Spirit will direct his church forward. Amen.